Eccoci qua.
Buongiorno a tutti, good morning everyone. I'm glad to meeting you in person after such a long time. We started our seed funding project 1 year ago, where we had many meetings, however, they were virtual. This is the very first time we have the chance to meet in person, and I'm really, really glad to be so today and to hear you and to meet you in person. So, Migration Perspective in Europe, this is the title of our seed funding project, which was granted by the Europe Alliance. And I'm glad to have here Silvia Bianconcini, who's the delegate for Europa at the University of Bologna. So Thank you. Silvia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. As Matteo said, I'm Silvia Bianconcini. I'm the delegate for Europa and a member of the board of directors of the Alliance. And I'm here to give you a very warm, in Italian, warm welcome from on behalf of the rector, Professor Giovanni Molari, and of the Vice Rectorate for International Relations. I guess that all of you are well aware of who Europa is. Europa is an alliance now of 11 research universities that teach more than 600,000 students and count almost 100,000 members of academic and professional staff. And Europa, must say, aims to draw from our collective strength to create what we call the University of the Future, very bright, and mainly to create a truly European inter-university environment. Of course, a deep thanks goes to the organizers of this final conference and workshop and to the coordinator of this seed founding project, this is Matteo. And what is the seed founding initiative? Is a specific of Europa, and it aims to spark and support the collaboration activities among the academics of our universities. The idea is to plant seeds with multiple purposes, of course, to create a network of academics based on their activities, but also to create this kind of network to be able to attract in the future external fundings. That should be the final aim of this kind of networks. And also from our perspective as a governance, it has been very, very helpful tool to a way to create a kind of awareness of the alliance among the academics of our universities. That is not really so easy to be so capillary and reach all the academic of university, and to create this kind of awareness and sense of belonging to the alliance. Events like the one that you are going to attend today are very helpful with the impact of this kind of in creating academic networks. And we are very grateful to the organizers and also to all the speakers for their commitment to help us to better understand what has been the main results of this project and to strengthen the collaboration among our university. So in this spirit, I wish you a very enjoyable and fruitful event.
Thank you. Thank you, Silvia, for introducing the topic of seed funding and the importance of Europa for our...
I cannot talk about theater.
No. Okay, we can neither talk about statistics or your field of expertise, so we will be carefully avoid.
Okay.
Don't worry about that. So thank you for introducing the topic of seed funding, which offered us the opportunity to produce this research project and create this network that worked efficiently far beyond the topic itself of migration and theater. We started to work together also on other aspects, much broader aspects of theater and migration, not only the specific topic of this call, but also others. So it worked efficiently.
Right.
Besides, in only 1 year. So what happens in the future, we hopefully increase this cooperation. I also would like to thank Professor Roberta Paltrinieri, who is the director of DAMS Lab, this amazing place our foreign colleagues will have to learn. You have seen just a piece of Das Lab, which is the auditorium. Later this afternoon, you will experience the hall and this workshop, which is prepared right outside for you, for us to enjoy. And later this evening, also we have a theatrical venue right away. So we will have the chance to experience this place in full detail. Okay, we also have a cinema here, which we won't use in this case, but hopefully in the next future, who knows, maybe for the next seed funding call or anything else. So I would like to say a few words about theater migration, about the project itself. We are all perfectly aware that theater and migration are tightly connected since the very beginning of our, at least from the Western history of theater, the history of Western theater at least. You don't need me to remind that Dionysus itself, the myth of Dionysus, who starts the spark of theater in our Western civilization, is a migrant himself. He's a stranger who comes to a land, to Greece, to bring the spark of the theater itself, of the performing arts. Performing arts that start crossing borders among the Greek cities, among those nations, those countries, and travel the world, which is the aspect that still outlines the importance of theater over history. We all know that such a relevant topic like cultural mobility, Stevens Greenberg theorization on cultural mobility is such a relevant, gives such a successful and relevant description of how cultures move and develop over time, and we all know that theater is a consistent part of this cultural mobility, and it has been so important over centuries. For instance, we all know the importance of traveling and roaming companies, wandering companies, traveling Europe in the first place from our perspective, but also overseas, over centuries, starting from Commedia dell'arte to wandering companies and traveling companies to the Americas, for instance. This is a topic I'm very fond on. And which brings us to current days. Migration is indeed a trending topic in the public debate, in the public sphere, first of all. We are all perfectly aware that migration is one of the frequently described as an issue in today's public debate, mainly with our new government position, the European position in regard to migration, and also in regard to the Ukraine war. But also migration is a relevant topic in several theoretical strands. For instance, we have many studies, of course, in the social studies dealing with migration. The performance studies deal with migrations, and also the practice of theater companies have to deal with migration and increasingly deal with migration. And here comes the problem we tried to outline and to investigate with our seed funding project. That is to say, the importance of migration for all these research areas, how they can relate to each other. And we found that there is a lack of scholarly research when interdisciplinary perspective, starting from migration and moving to the theater, is at stake. And so that's what we tried to tackle with our seed funding. We are perfectly aware that the project is ambitious. I mean, migration and theater is a huge topic, of course, and we try to investigate some pieces, some case studies, focuses on national experiences based on the experiences of universities that are part of our network. And we hope that in the next future we can further develop this project, also including other European and Northern Africa's areas that are relevant to this topic. How this project developed? We tried to investigate the relationship between the performing arts and theater and the performing arts in general and migration in Europe on two sides. That is, the first one is the investigate the effects of on theatrical cultures that migrations have, how migration influences theatrical cultures. And this is the first strand of our research. The second one tries to answer the question how theatrical cultures have read migrations phenomena up to these days, in the recent past and in current days. And also the relationship between current days and the recent past are outlined in our conference, which you all have the program in your hands, and I hope it meets your expectations in the first place. And we try to, since migration is a varied and a multifaceted topic, we try to create a varied and multifaceted program. That is why we have the more institutional part of our conference this morning, which includes a focus and two panels on how, to answer the first question, how migration influences and is theater and is influenced by migrations in current days, in the present days. And I decided to start with the present days so that we can, later this afternoon, we can meet two companies, Migrantheatre and Cantieri Medici, that have extensively worked on migration. They both started their activity working with migrant communities, with asylum seekers, with refugees fleeing from wars from Africa mainly and Eastern Asia to Europe, to Italy namely, and starting from the same material, apparently the same material, they developed two different, very different approaches and two very different shows and performances. The first one, Migrantheatre, has developed a racist cabaret, as they call it, whose title in Italian is vulgar, is Sporco Negro, and it cannot be translated because it includes a harsh reference to the N-word, of course, and it is a cabaret. We will have to laugh. We will. We will bitterly have to laugh at how racist we are inside ourselves, in our culture. And this is one perspective. Cantieri Medici, on the other hand, which will meet later this afternoon, you've noticed those boxes. They're the result of a workshop they produced here in our dams, in our undergraduate course, with the company, the migrant company, and some of our students over the past 2 weeks. And we will be part of the performance later this afternoon. And in that case, working with migrants, they created a tragedy, more or less, basically a tragedy. So we have a comedy on the first side, and on the other hand, we have a tragedy. And they started working, I will know more later, on The Nigger of the Narcissus by Joseph Conrad. In that case, the N-word is explicit in the title. It's a novel by Conrad, which is the base of the work. And in the evening, we'll have to experience the show of Migrantheatre, Sporco Negro, and tomorrow we will get back here to discuss the recent past, how migration influenced the theatrical production in Europe, in several areas of Europe, from Poland to Scotland to Spain and Italy in the end, and how this recent past has been a seed for roots that lead us to nowadays. So I hope the program meets your expectations once again, and I think we can start with the first panel. So thank you. Grazie Silvia. Sì, iniziare con Giulia Allegrini. So I kindly ask Giulia Allegrini to meet me here. As I have just said, migration is a heavily interdisciplinary topic, and the history of theater is an interdisciplinary topic, and we need, as theater historians, we need some order to take place. And who else could I call to place some order in this multifaceted topic than a sociologist? So Giulia Allegrini is a colleague of the University of Bologna, is a researcher in sociology of culture. And she carries out research in the field of participation and civic imagination processes, cultural participation practices, and the role of culture and artistic practices in the production of well-being and social change and study of audiences and participatory cultures. And she has many cooperations and collaborations in the city, including one with, for instance, one with the Foundation for Urban Innovation, who is partner of this project. And for several years, she has designed and facilitated action research processes with public bodies and associations. And the title of her speech today is The Social Role of the Performing Arts, Analytical Perspectives and an Exploration of Practices. I remind Silvia and all the other participants to stick to the timing, otherwise we get out of our schedule, and we all have 25 minutes, and when we are close to the end, I will let you know. So thank you, Silvia, for being here, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be here to share some insight concerning, on one side, some researches, but I have to explain that maybe it seems really ambitious, this type of intervention, since, as you will see, I would like to approach three main parts in my contribution. I just want to say that I will not be really exhaustive, and since I don't have time to really go in depth in each of these parts, but the intention is to share some key perspectives emerging in the debate, in particular about migration and social construction, that is a very big issue, and also about framing social role of performing arts. Okay, and I have to say that framing the social role of performing arts, again, can be really a huge topic. So I will share, again, some key analytical perspectives. And finally, concerning artistic practices, as you can see, I will refer mainly to what is also called like social and political engaged artistic practices. And I will focus on emerging questionings, so not really examples, concrete examples, but some key challenges, let's say. Starting from the first point, the first of things that we should to take in mind from a sociological perspective is that migration is a social construction. And to understand this, it is important, first of all, to overcome what is still sometimes prevailing, the overcoming of the functionalist approach and paradigm that is basically based on the push and pull factors model, meaning that the push factor for migrate and the attraction, so the pulling factor, and is based on this idea of strategy and calculation. And this type of approach basically doesn't put the attention on something that for our as sociologists are key, that is the human agency and the capabilities. So on the other part, we have the capabilities framework to migration, and that intends to underline that, of course, there is a matter of geographical opportunity structures on one side but there is also capabilities and aspirations. And so humans' mobility as people's capability. And the second point that is, of course, complementary to this one is that we should make a distinction between the experience, so the migratory reality as an experience, and the act, the migratory act that is part of that, of course. So the migratory reality is a social construction and is related, of course, to context, but is also related, of course, to the meanings that are attached to what precede the migratory act, but also what emerge through that experience and that makes sense to the results of that experience. It's also important that to focus, to understand this from a sociological point of view, that we are talking about the migratory imaginary. But the migratory imaginary, of course, as we will see later, it's not something neutral, of course, as it is an imaginary. And so, of course, it is related to the sphere of the experience. It is related to culture and agency of the migrant. And of course, there is also a median environment. So there are, of course, the communication flows that deeply affect the constitution of imaginaries. So from this point of view, we can say that migration is a total social fact, meaning that it's related and concern all the societies involved in the migration reality. And of course, at the same time, it is what is important to underline is that of course, as already Matteo remembered before, social and political migration is is part of human history, of course, but its definition is political. And so it's linked to social economic context, but also is influenced by media, and as an infrastructure constitutes the world in material and symbolic ways. So, what is important also to underline that it means that we should question, of course, the categories that we use to construct these words. The category of tough, of course. We have to say that this imaginary is built up in a tension and in a conflict. It's not neutral, as I already said, of course, and is a meaning-making process that is composed by different and is shaped by different gazes. And so we should also to focus a little bit on this process of framing and about and questioning frames of meaning concerning migration. And this very, very shortly, we can say that in the debate on migration, and now I'm talking about the field study concerning sociological perspective of migration. We can say that the literature now has already identified some key frames and way of defining migration. On one side, we have, of course, the humanitarian narrative that underlines moral and universal imperative to act to rescue the most vulnerable. And this is really linked to migrant as a victim. On the other side, it's, so from one side, the care, but on the other side, the security. So the security discourse is, of course, is linked to an idea of migrant as a problem of security, of public order. We could say many, many things. There are many, maybe you had in your mind, many types of expression that are used to describe this type of public or this problem of public order and security. So the result of both of the narratives is the dehumanization in reality, because there's no space for voice or agency again. So in some way, there is some kind of abstract representation of the otherness. And so coming to the second part, having in mind that we are talking about imaginaries, we are talking about meanings, we are talking about conflict of meanings and imaginaries, and we could maybe, sorry, okay, it disappeared something, okay. So we can start to think about what does it mean to put in connection the social role of performing arts, having in mind this type of understanding of migration as a social construction. First of all, I have to say that from the perspective of sociology of culture, and this is my field of study, the basic thing that I have to share is that we study the relation between cultural objects and practices and the social world, and the relationship between producing and receiving culture. So all these connections are the key part of our way of looking at cultural practices. And but a first way to approach the idea of the social or performing art is to focus on the relationship between performing art and the process of imagination. And this important word about that is, I have no time to really discuss about this, but I just put on the table things, let's say like this, cosmopolitanism. So on one side we have imaginaries that there's something fixed, that is constructed, but are something that we have, and it seems that they cannot change in some way. But we have the process of imagination, that is about how we can change imaginaries, setting up alternatives, representations of things, of categories, of issues, of that of course are reproduced thanks to also a process of imagination that can interrupt these types of meaning-making process. So opening up also for new meanings and actions in terms of practices. And of course is an issue also of word picture making process, imagination in that sense. And for this reason, as Pastor Jati says, can be a cosmopolitan constitution of imaginary, or a imaginary constitution of cosmopolitanism, let's say. And this is a way also to say that artistic practice can contribute to an epistemological diversity of the word itself. So imagination is one of the key process to understand in which sense performing art can play a social role. Just very briefly, when we talk about cosmopolitanism, we could say many things, but it's normally linked to the idea of universalism. And universalism sometimes is, let's say, a very challenging and ambivalent, also ambivalent terrain of understanding key things, some key aspect that is diversity and equity. So what we are talking about in this sense is a type of universalism that is not defined like through rational argumentation, like in a normative way to arrive to universalism, but it takes in consideration diversity, of course, as a key point to arrive to universalism. And so it's not something fixed, it's a result, again, of a process based on mutual recognition. So this, the imagination process is also linked to the fields of aesthetics and politics. Here we can call into question, and no, not call into question, to recall what Rancière, for example, says about this. But before, I want to mention another reference, that is Ariona Padurai, that proposed this idea of cultural capacities to aspire. Aspiration is connected to the future, the dimension of future, but, and he says that future is a cultural fact, because is exactly truth the capability to represent and reconstruct, and of course to dissent to some kind of representations that we can change also our daily life. So the future dimension connected with the daily dimension also, the present, let's say, dimension. And so it's connected with imagination again. And but of course, aesthetics and politics are also connected as a practices. And just very briefly to remember that this is really connected with what Rancière says about the partition of the sensible, because is connected about how ideas, abilities, and experiences are distributed and shared. So time and spaces are really political issues, of course, and aesthetics in that sense can be related to issues of politics. And it is interesting what Rancière says about artistic practices that can take part to the partition of the perceptible insofar they suspend the ordinary coordinates of sensory experience. And in that sense, they can reframe the network of relationships between spaces, times, subject, object, the common and the singular. I don't have time, but just to say that if we take in mind this, maybe we can think about artistic practice also as a space to for new types of citizenship, meaning not citizenship as a legal status, of course, but as a performative act, as an enactment of citizenship. So through the practices itself. And another way to understand the social role of performing arts, imagination, aesthetics, and politics. And of course, I cannot mention another issue that is a very big one, and many scholars and theoretical frameworks could be recalled here. But connecting to what we are, what I'm discussing is the issue of public sphere and public spaces. And we can think about how performing art can interrupt, let's say, a combination of factors, because public spheres are not something static. Today we have many public spheres, and it's a process, and it's a combination of many factors. It is exactly from the type of combination in a specific contingent and historical moment that we can understand that, again, the role of performing art can intervene in that process of suspending the coordinates that are related to our sensorial experience, but not only to the sensorial experience, of course, but because they can reveal how it functions, how they works in that this type of combination in a specific historical moment. And we can also think at the same time to the spatial dimension of the public spheres, and thinking about that this spatial dimension is related to a relational type of construction, and where different types of regimes of visibilities are possible. And I'm talking about visibility of subject, of issues, of categories, of representations, and so on. Many scholars say that all these things are related to process of combination of consensus and dissensus every time. And so it's a matter of, again, of conflict also. So thinking about spatial dimension as a public space or public spheres also concerning the conflict dimension. So the last way to understand, not the last in my contribution, the last way to understand the social order of performing arts is that specifically, if we talk about performing arts, we are talking about embodied practices. So if we are talking about embodied practices, if we take in mind what I already said about imaginations and so on, it's interesting to understand in which term they can create counter memories, because they are really related to memories, identity, sense of identity, and the construction of social knowledge, how it is transmitted through embodied practices. So today we are, I think, we can observe really interesting cultural and aesthetic transformations about way of seeing identity, politics, and society as a whole. So is it specific, the domain and the field of embodying practices that I think can really reveal the possibility of create alternatives to non-hegemonic, in terms of non-hegemonic practices and narratives and so on. So I have, I think, 4 minutes again, still, more or less, no? Maybe more, I don't know.
Let's stick to 5, okay. And then we'll see.
No, 25, you say?
Yes.
Okay. I'm looking, no. Okay, 5, okay. 5
I'm
minutes.
not that strict. I'm not.
Okay, so no, in reality, I think I have 3 minutes. So I will just say really few things about some insight emerging from 2 projects, European projects. In the first one, Migrantheatre was also part of, as one of the partner, and now I'm here involved more in the last one, performing gender dancing in your shoes. Both of them are really working in this field of what I not I, but other also scholars talk about socially and politically engaged artistic practices. So I have to delimitate a little bit the field, otherwise it's really too big to say performing arts in general, of course. And again, in that field, there are many kinds of interpretations, I know. So I really am aware about that. And but they worked, both of these projects were have one is finished, but are working about relationship between spaces and identity, migration and art, performativity of identity, and so on. So they mixed a lot of kind of practices. So performances, talkings, public talkings, intervention in public spaces. So this is our key element to understand better what I will say now. So the first thing, this is a very challenging issue that we are approaching in the last project, but also, of course, was a key part of discussion also in the other one, is concern about the meaning of community. It's a very big issue again. But what is interesting is the approach to communities in terms of building up communities as the result, of course, not as a fixed entity, but is a kind of interpretative community engaged in a meaning-making process of imagination again. Of course, working on divergent meanings and truth embodiments, of course. So of course, let's say that is a way to enhance different types of encounters. What is interesting is that this process is based, and I think that later you will have an experience in that sense, through process of assemblages. My pronunciation maybe is not really correct. When I'm talking about assemblages, I'm talking about something that, again, is working not on fixed things or put in a hierarchical way, but is a combination of connections between, in this case, of encounters, differences, spaces, possibilities, desires. So the embodying practices are really related with this type of embodiments and assemblages. And both of the project worked a lot on this level. A second one is concerning about, I think it's interesting that some of the organization involved in this last project where I'm involved at the moment are really thinking about how to also, not only in the specific practices, but as a cultural organization, we could implement a human-specific approach to against like transactional relationships between many types of actors, between cultural organizations that are supporting artists, with communities, territories, publics as audiences, and so on. So, and they are thinking about what does it mean to make human these types of relationship. So how we can rearrange power and hierarchies inside the organizations by in these types of relationships. What does it mean to care the process and not only the products? And how we can approach two things that are really, really complex: risk on one side and failure on the other side. So many things, but just to share that there are organizations that are thinking about this way of programming and producing, how we can change that. This is also reflecting other types of things, think about at the city level, what does it mean to talk about also political culture or politics or culture in a city? So there are experiences that are really based on this idea of commoning art. Is something in between, is a civil zone between the market and the state. And is a process of as this author says, disruption and construction, because art organization and reality and companies that maybe are supported also by subsidies, political, public one. But on the other side, we are trying to understand how we can create platform for collaboration. Again, to change the way of producing, again, to programming, to practicing art. And I'm going to finish. All these things, of course, have very big questions. So transformation or exploitation, subversion or digest in the practice and in the way of producing again. And I know that I don't have time to explore all these things, but this is the questionings of the project that we are trying to, not to respond, of course, but to explore and to find ways. And finally, I really come to finish. All these things are questioning the role of artists itself. Because if we are saying that there are some ambivalences that are this one, for example, between transformation and exploitations, where, for example, artists can sometimes arrogantly claim to speak on behalf of the disenfranchised other. So, or, for example, mainly in communities-based art, for example, this risk of, in reality, to have a digestive type of artistic practices. So all this risk, of course, on one side, but on the other side, we could think how it is changing maybe the role of artists as a mediator that is not neutral, mediator of imaginaries, again, a mediator of cosmopolitan agency, together, of course, with publics, audiences, communities, and publics, and so on. And but not only mediation, maybe remediation, if we focus on how it's changing the medium, the artistic practices, or this author is more focused on cultural heritage. But I think that it's interesting to take this view and thinking about also performing art, how they can remediate in that sense. Changing the combination between objects, spaces, bodies, publics, and cultural operators as well. And finally, to remediate to many things we should in this moment, I think. And of course, in terms of counter narratives, but also in terms of visibility of subject issues, and also of possibilities of times and spaces. I finish.
Thank you, Julia, for accepting this challenge of summarizing really a word of knowledge that we frequently ignore when we discuss as theater scholars the importance of sociology and a sociological approach to the study of the theater and the performing arts. I have many questions. We will save them for later. I suggest we save all the questions for the end of the panel. And you put so much on the floor that we will certainly have to discuss, I guess, also, because you also introduced some, thank you, Julia, we'll see you in a while. I kindly ask Sofia Naku to approach, because Julia put so much on the floor. For instance, the importance of theater as an act to build citizenship, and this is precisely one of the topics that Sofia will talk us about. Sofia is a young scholar of the University of Edinburgh, and she's a practitioner herself in the field of theater. She's a theater director and an applied theater practitioner, specializing in theater of the oppressed. She's pursuing her PhD at Edinburgh, and today her paper discusses the topic of reconstructing the asylum system through the lens of applied theater. So thank you, Sofia. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Also, really thank you, Julia. That was fascinating, and you put so many things into this presentation. I have so many questions too. I will be talking about narrative and ethics and how they both exist within applied theatre and the asylum system. I will be mainly focusing on the asylum system in the UK, but most Western asylum systems have very similar processes, so we can apply this to most of them. And finally, I will talk briefly about a case study of a theatre company in Jenin refugee camp in Palestine. So this is, quite briefly, how the asylum system in the UK looks like. Once a person enters the UK, they have to apply for asylum, claim asylum as soon as possible, and that will lead them to a screening interview. From the screening interview, they will then pass to a substantive interview, where the result can be a positive or a negative one. If it's negative, they can then appeal to a first-tier tribunal, which is very similar to a court. And from them, the result can be a positive or a negative one. If it's negative, they can appeal to an upper tribunal, etc., etc. But they can only appeal with new information. So if we're looking at this system, the person has the chance to share their narrative a few times during the screening interview, the substantive interview, and the appeals. Having said that, though, there is an issue that keeps coming up when we're looking at the asylum system, and that is the one of credibility. Credibility findings is the point in which in the asylum process at which the immigration officer, immigration judge, or other decisive authority makes an assessment on whether an asylum seeker's story is to be believed. A lack of credibility can seriously undermine the claim for an asylum seeker. And is also the reason that most asylum applications are being rejected. As I said, a big part of the asylum system is very similar to a court, but the problem is that in this case, they have no other proof other than their narrative, other than the story they bring with them. And this is exactly why being credible is extremely important, to be perceived as credible. There is quite a lot of research that discusses how apparently the decisive authorities in the Home Office know exactly who is lying and who is not by looking at them or by listening to them. But again, though, there is a lot of research, on the other hand, that claims that very often the credibility is being judged on performativity or on identity that sometimes is being enforced upon them. Another point, though, that can harm credibility is if new information comes up during the process, That means that if in the beginning of the process, the asylum seeker hasn't disclosed everything because of fear, uncertainty, because of lack of legal support, then if the story comes up later on in the process, that might actually hurt their credibility. And as a result, sometimes asylum lawyers actually urge their clients to not share anymore. As a result, there is a question that's being raised here about, in reality, how many times do asylum seekers truly have the opportunity to share their story? Where does the story really exist? All these narratives that exist within the asylum system are there to prove that the person seeking asylum can fit within the Article 1 of the 1951 Geneva Convention of Refugees. So the point of every story being shared is to prove that there is a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular political group, or political opinion. But another issue that comes up here is that even with this definition specifically, the stories that are coming up can be deeply traumatizing. None of these stories is an easy story to share. As a result, the system becomes dysfunctional, not only because it does not provide access to justice, but also because the system itself not only doesn't care for the people going through it, but is also dysfunctional for the people working in it. We cannot possibly claim that listening to these stories, that time in and time out, does not affect both your mental health and your ability to make decisions. Borrowing a definition from narrative therapy, it is, if we directly address people's experience of trauma, that can be unproductive at best and in many cases deleterious. Such efforts can contribute to experience of re-traumatization and a sense of alienation. As a result, we have the people going through a system trying to share their story, being alienated from their story, and sometimes being re-traumatized, if not traumatized from the system itself. As I said, I am borrowing this definition from narrative therapy. Narrative therapy is a collaborative approach to counseling in which the therapist and client re-author the client's problem story, grounded in feminist, anthropological, and multicultural theories, where narrative approaches occupies the theoretical space in opposition to a historical top-down approach of psychology. So this is only a framework I'm using here. I'm using it as a framework, but we're discussing into how narrative can exist in an equal situation, how we can look into that in order to re-author said story. And also, according to narrative therapy, we have the definition of narrative identity, which is a person's internalized and evolving life story, integrating the reconstructed past and imagined future to provide life with some degree of unity and purpose. It is this story that we can claim that is being asked for within the asylum system. How did you get here? Where were you born? What is your life story? How do you fit within the Article 1 of the Geneva Convention? But also, this is the story that is requested from, that is being used in applied theater as well. This is the stories that we're sharing. Applied theater is a term that gained currency in the 1990s as students, academics, theater practitioners, and policymakers used them as a kind of shorthand to describe forms of dramatic activity that are specifically intended to benefit individuals, communities, and societies. Applied theater can take many forms. It can be theater in the community, theater in schools, theater for development, very problematic term, we'll talk about that later. But overall, the thing that applied theater is an umbrella term that brings together forms of theater that believe that theater can be something more than the form itself. They can have a goal bigger than itself. And as a result, it can be used in a community to address specific problems within the community, and it also can be used in a corporate environment to discuss HR issues. Applied theater is deeply influenced by Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire talks about cultural invasion and cultural synthesis. His analysis talks mainly about pedagogy and teaching, but I believe that it's quite easy to see how that can be also applied within an applied theatre setting and where teacher put a facilitator. So the teachers or the cultural invasion can be seen as a teacher, a situation where the teacher or the facilitator is seen as a know-it-all being and the student an empty bucket. And the role of the teacher or facilitator in this case is to fill in the bucket as much as possible. And then a good teacher is the one that fills the empty bucket, that is the student, as much as they can. And then a good student is the bucket that will take all the information in. This is not a good thing. On the other hand, Freire discusses cultural synthesis, which is when we create an environment where knowledge emerges only through invasion and reinvasion, through restless, impatient, continuing, hopeful inquiry human beings pursue in the world and with each other. This is how we can create a safe environment for us to share, discuss, and create. Applied theatre can give an opportunity to participants to re-author conversations. This is another definition borrowed by narrative therapy. And let me be very clear here that I'm not claiming that applied theatre is therapy, but applied theatre and narrative therapy use some similar tools. In this process, people are invited to reflect on past events of their lives and include alternative themes or counterplots in aiming towards ending up in a more positive outcome. So it's about looking at your past, not to reinvent your future. And at this point, I would like to briefly mention a theatre company in Palestine called Freedom Theatre, that they're using their narratives in a very creative and self-defined way. And I believe that is actually a very big advocate for what I'm talking about. Freedom Theatre was established by Giuliano Mercamis in 2004, based on the legacy of Arna Mercamis, his mother. Freedom Theatre has a professional theatre stage where they have professional productions that they tour around Europe and sometimes around the world. They have a care and learning department, which is their youth theatre, with young children from around the camp. They have a theatre school, which is a 3 years training course. It's practically a drama school. Very often they take adults from the youth theatre and they move into the training course. And something that I find very important here is that very often the professional actors are graduates of the drama course. And very often the facilitators in the youth theatre are also their own graduates. So they have a very self-sustainable work happening. They also work with multimedia and photography, and they also have the Freedom Bus, which I see it as a very Rancière Freire project. During Freedom Bus, they take actors which are also Palestinian refugees on the bus, and they start touring around the West Bank and other refugee camps in the area. They set up stages, and they invite the locals from the camps, they sit in a circle, and they start sharing stories. Palestinian narratives are deeply traumatized, especially if we start looking into past generations as well, and generation trauma is something that is actually quite definitive for them. As a result, sharing all these generational stories actually connects them as people in a state that tries to separate them. And once the stories have been shared, the actors then perform the stories, and then they create a conversation about how many common narratives these stories have. So storytelling and keeping culture alive is at the core of their work. Now, of course, theater is not a perfect tool. Any tool that uses personal stories, uses real people, has to have ethical considerations. We have to problem solve it. Applied theater doesn't even have a very innocent past. There is a lot of examples. There are many examples of white saviorism, of religion getting involved. And as a result, we really need to be very thorough with how we establish an ethical framework. But also, on the same hand, it's quite easy when you start establishing ethical frameworks to feel that everything is pointless, it should all just stop. But that's, of course, not the solution here. How we should be looking into ethics should be a process of questioning rather than exercising morality. Ethics is not a bat that we take and we start beating things up with. It's how we question, what frameworks we put in. It's not about the answers. Very often it's about the questions. So how do we negotiate the telling of trauma while recognizing its incommunicability? It's a fact that the trauma is a little part of our brain that cannot be translated into words. As a result, how can we request of someone to actually say it out loud? What is the appropriate language in which to speak of trauma? How do we discuss trauma in a workshop space? I'm not even discussing stages at the moment. I'm discussing process-based work. How do we discuss trauma in a group? And what are the ethical implications of being a listener and a performer to testimony? So if we're in a workshop space, as a facilitator, what is your responsibility of listening to all this trauma? All these are questions I don't have answers to, but I think it's important to keep asking them when we're looking into a process of applied theatre. And also, I would be very interested to see what will happen if we try and apply them in the asylum system. Asylum law has no ethical considerations. And I am very curious about what asylum system will we end up with if we start asking these questions. So I would like to finish with 2 points. Firstly, it's pretty much a fact that asylum systems are failing. They're failing the people going through them, and they're failing the people that work there. Who they're working for, I don't know. As a result, there is a vast amount of literature discussing that law on its own cannot deal with such a complicated and ongoing issue. We need a multidisciplinary approach here. And it's my point that theatre and applied theatre can be a process that exists next to an asylum system in order to support people going through it. And secondly, as I mentioned earlier, we have no ethical framework in the asylum system. We have no ethical framework within which stories are being shared or stories are being listened. As a result, can we start as academics and as practitioners imagining an asylum system that tries to ask these questions, and how would that look like? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sofia, and I'm glad you touched some points that are key also to the workshop we are having later this afternoon. For instance, how do you discuss trauma in a group? This is precisely one of the answers that the practitioners we are meeting, Migrantheatre and Cantiere Medici, tried to answer with 2 different approaches, as I previously said. For instance, we will discuss it better discuss it later, but for instance, some of the asylum seekers felt themselves more comfortable in discussing their own trauma, working on the narrative of Conrad rather than working on their own trauma. Migrantheatre, on the other hand, chose another way to discuss it. So thank you for sharing this, and once again, questions will be answered and done after the last presentation of Ekim Bodur. Thank you. Please approach. I'm glad to have you here. Ekim Bodur will once again focus on the UK system with hello, nice to meet you. This is once again, this is the first time we meet in person. After we shared many meetings on MS Teams.
Yeah.
God save MS Teams, but meeting in person is even much better. Ekim Bodur comes from the University of Cambridge. She's a PhD candidate there and in English at King's College, Cambridge University. And before this, she completed a PhD degree in English in Turkey at Bogazici, I hope I pronounced it correctly, University. And her current research focuses on the 21st century adaptations of Sophocles' Antigone and, of course, other adaptations of Antigone in relation to epistemic resistance in Turkey, Ireland, and the UK. And Ekin's work today focuses specifically on the work of Inua Ellams, who is an African-born playwright working in London, who wrote an adaptation of Antigone, which is still ongoing in London nowadays. It's a much debated version and a fascinating one, indeed. And in her presentation, she will discuss Inua Lemon's work on Antigone under the perspective on thematics, which is a key word in Sophocles' Antigone and also in Ellam's work. So please, the floor is yours.
Hello. My presentation is called Writing Britain's Metics, and it is based on a very recent play by Inua Ellams, Antigone. It was staged this year in September in London. But before I start my presentation, I want to show you some video clips from the play, if it's okay. So. Yeah, so oops. See? Yeah. So I want to start by showing the showing the trailer first, and then some audience responses. I don't know. Sorry, this is not it. Maybe I should. And this is some audience response. Oops, sorry. There's a
Global warming is a fact.
This piece is so important.
It's fantastic. Very intelligent, very sharp and relevant show.
It is gripping drama. It tells a classical story but makes it relevant to today. Writing's beautiful. I mean, poetry and passion in the same breath.
I really love it. I love the ambition of it. And it's just great to see such a diverse cast on stage.
Scary how apposite and prescient it is. I love the adaptation. I love the choreography. I love the set design. Actors are all incredible, and I love what it says.
Completely appropriates everything that's important and intrinsic in nature and society about Greek theatre.
The chorus and the dance and the kind of the poetry.
It's like keeping the integrity of the original, but like placing it in like literally today.
I thought it was incredible. I thought it was really important. I thought it was heartbreaking and perfectly done.
And Zainab, who played Antigone, she was incredible. The real force of her performance is amazing.
So proud of the story that we're telling. I think it's powerful. I think it's magical. I think it's relevant. I think it speaks to the state of the nation now. I think there's just so much in it.
It's urgent, it's happening, it's now.
And one last thing would be just the beginning of the play, because I want to give you a clip. It's not me. Probably YouTube is still continuing. Sorry.
Migrantheatre is the most magical venue in London, and this show is...
Okay, sorry about that. I want to show you the beginning of the play because I want to give you a glimpse into how poetry and the idea of the chorus is integrated. Oops. So it's here.
Si può aprire quel link?
I tried it at home, it was working.
Yes. It's open.
No, it's here. Yeah. Yep, thank you. I'll just skip forward for a bit. Yeah. So the girl in the yellow coat is Antigone. Okay, I want to stop here. Maybe I will show what, or maybe once I don't want to rearrange it, so maybe I should show it now and then I can explain just an instance of the chorus as well. 26. Sorry. For example, this is one of the choruses. This is part of the funeral scene when the Muslim community gathers for a janazah. So you can see how there's these elements of dance, poetry, and music at the same time all through the play. Okay, sorry, I have to stop because I will not have time for my presentation otherwise. Okay. So I think this is right. Oh, sorry, let's just go to the beginning. So let me just talk briefly about Inuala's. So he is a Nigerian-born, UK-based poet, and he has recently been a dual national of Nigeria and Britain just this year, even though he migrated to the UK as a child. So he had to wait for like more than 20 years. So his hit play was in 2017, Barbershop Chronicles at the National Theatre, where he explored the notion of African diaspora around the world. And then he also made an adaptation again at the National of Chekhov's Three Sisters that was set during the Nigerian War in the 1960s. That same year, he also wrote an epic, which was adapted to stage, Half God of Rainfall, And Antigone is actually his second theater adaptation of a canonical play. So just to remember a little bit about Sophocles' Antigone, you will remember that it's the aftermath of Oedipus's sons, Eteocles and Polynices, killing one another in their struggle for the throne. And Antigone, one of the sisters, insists on burying her brother, whereas Ismene, her sister, the other sister, let's say, has second thoughts, or seems more compliant in the classical version. However, Ellams's Antigone, which ran at the Regent's open-air theatre in London this September, is a contemporary version of the tragedy from the perspective of British Muslims in a post-9/11 world and in relation to UK's anti-terror laws, and most particularly the stripping of nationality, especially when people join the Islamic State. So the play mobilizes Sophocles' tragedy to question how this understanding of terrorism in the West has been instrumental in the epistemic justice suffered by its Muslim populations, particularly in Britain. It seeks to carve out an epistemic space for the silenced narratives vulnerable to state hostility and advocate for epistemic resistance. So, to summarize the play, it's set in contemporary London, and Antigone, Ismene, Polynices, and Eteocles are British Pakistani siblings, and their uncle Creon is a British Pakistani politician, which we can recognize from UK politic scene, that is a Home Secretary running to become a Prime Minister. In the meantime, Polynices is radicalized by Islamist groups, and he takes part in a terrorist attack in London against civilians. Eteocles, in the meantime, has become a police officer, and what's different from the general story is that Creon and his political aides decide that this act of Polynices can be instrumentalized as part of Creon's political campaign to become the PM. And this is what makes, even though he has no chance of winning normally, by using this narrative around terror and the politics of combating terror, he is able to become elected the new PM. And there's an imam, Nicomedes, who conducts the funeral of Eteocles, but he is afraid of being criminalized himself, and he cannot conduct the other funeral. So, as we know, Antigone decides to do this herself, and Creon gets Antigone arrested. The difference is that people mobilize to rescue Antigone and to stop Creon's rule, especially women. So the women in the classical play who are more silent, like whose perspectives we do not get the chance to hear, in this play gain a better importance, and Ismene and Eurydice, Ismene, the compliant sister, and Eurydice, the queen, in the original play, agree to organize a woman rally to stop Creon in his track. At the same time, Tiresias is a computer data expert who kind of manipulates the data so that the politician can win. However, in the meantime, Antigone is really desperate in her prison cell and she commits suicide. Haemon also dies, her fiancé, and in the final moment, Creon, in his shock, and Ismene leads the imam Nicomedes to hold all the funerals. So these, as I showed you just a little part, these funeral scenes are conducted with a lot of choreography and aesthetics. So I basically want to talk more about the politics of the play. There are like millions of issues to talk, but I want to focus on why Inua Elams adapts Sophocles' Antigone to talk about these pressing political urgencies instead of writing maybe, I don't know, a brand new play. So I'm researching all similar kinds of plays, and what I find out that almost in every instance, these playwrights and theater makers are actually commissioned by people to adapt a classical play. So in this sense, it's basically, I think, what is more pressing is the demands of the theatrical market itself that kind of recirculates these classical plays in a totally different, in a totally new context. But while doing these, playwrights like Elams, in an interview used a phrase. He said, I like hacking the canon. So they make use of Antigone's canonical status and cultural legitimacy to communicate more controversial issues. And they kind of use the iterability of Antigone's speech acts and also Antigone's resistance strategy to make space for their own resistant discourses to claim sovereignty themselves. So in this sense, Antigone opens up a space for being heard for all suppressed narratives. So in this sense, I think Elams adapts Antigone strategically, both in terms of its plot and content, and also through adapting formal elements of tragedy, such as poetry. So this little bit of Antigone you heard was one of the poems in the play called "You Are My People," recited by Antigone. So Elams, as a poet himself, used his own poetry, and he also made use of a different kind of chorus. So instead of the classical chorus made up of Theban old men, here we have a chorus of young people who are struggling when the youth center, which is a vibrant place for the urban youth and the urban poor to have a cultural space, being closed down. And also we have a chorus of journalists, we have a chorus of the Muslim community. Also the music is very contemporary with hip hop dance and music and songs. And also, I think very importantly, he is also able to mobilize the ritual element of tragedy by showing the religion, Islam, as a religion, not as a political statement. So I think in order to counter this mainstream representation of Islam as a political enemy, in a way, quote unquote, in the West, he prefers to show Islam in its ritual function. And also, I think he makes another strategic choice by returning to tragedy's roots, not only in ritual, but also in community. So just as tragedy is part of a civic duty, the idea of community becomes central in Elams's play, which runs against the current of modernity, where the individual hero becomes more and more central, starting with the 19th century. So instead of the prioritization of the individual hero, we have the prioritization of the idea of community. That's why not only we have these choruses in the play having a central value, but also Antigone is no longer the solitary figure resisting patriarchy or the state on her own, but we have instead the organized struggle of women, beginning with figures like Ismene, Eurydice, and spreading to the whole community. So this idea of community is also reflected in the diversity of the play, in the cast, the audience. And we do not only have a mixed race audience or a mixed religion audience, but we also have a space for disabled actors, non-binary actors. So in that sense, it's quite diverse. And this diversity is also reflected in the audience, so that I think in the end, instead of what Rahina Ahmed calls anthropological reading of Muslims, like in a way rendering the Muslim community or the Muslims legible for the white, perhaps middle class theater goer. So instead of this, we have this idea of the community that also seeks to mobilize the multicultural population of London to create a space for solidarity and coalitions and facilitate dialogue between the audience and those on the stage. So I think the actors in that sense themselves are also very much invested in this idea of the theatrical production. So they're not just acting a part, but in a way telling their own stories to people who share their stories. So in that sense, for example, my own experience as part of the audience was similar, that like even hearing words that have their counterparts in my native language, Turkish, like cenaze, or like even the very simple word like Allah, or like other religious terms, even though I'm not a religious person myself, had the immediate effect of a feeling of inclusivity within the theatrical space. So I don't want to waste time with these guys. You already know them. You already know what they say, the understanding of citizenship as a privilege instead of the human rights. So in the play also, one of the basic arguments is the replacement of human rights law with a British Bill of Rights that will kind of erase the already cut down rights of immigrants and refugees. So this is the statistics of people losing their citizenship in the 21st century. This example of Shamima Begum being very prominent, and the problem of statelessness being reintroduced maybe after many years of legislation on this. But I want to come finally to this point on metoikos, which is central to the idea of being a stranger in the 21st century as well as in antiquity. So Matteo opened by saying how Dionysus himself was a stranger when he first came to his native country, like where he should originally be from, but he was a stranger and he was rejected as a stranger. So but in that sense, the metoikos is an in-between status. It's not xenos in the sense of being a total stranger or a visitor or like a tourist, but the metic is the stranger in the sense of being resident alien, like today's immigrant, or in more like dictionary terms, it would be like a migrant, wanderer, outsider. So it would be someone in the 5th century BC Athens who changes their home from one city to another, who come from a foreign city, start to live in the city, paying tax towards certain fixed needs of the city, but never having the rights of a citizen in their lifetime, and not being able to pass it down to their children either. So it's a position of having established residence. So in the play, Antigone is presented as someone as between life and death. Oops. It was 20 minutes, so I think I still have a few more minutes. It was a reminder for myself. So in the play, Antigone's status as a metic is represented as a metaphorical state between life and death. So when Antigone refers to herself, and when Creon refers to her as a metic, it's more like to indicate her liminality, her limit position in her in-betweenness between life and death. But also at the same time, we should remember that she was the person who accompanied Oedipus when he literally became a metic in another city, in Colonus. So this also kind of complicates her status, even though she's a native of Thebes, her wandering status between these cities. So Andres Fabian Henao Castro writes about this metic status of Antigone and how this could be mobilize in relation to the issue of citizenship in the Americas. So he says citizenship was a settler's privilege, and even when slavery was abolished, it was not citizenship, but something akin to metoika, the in-between position that was first extended to natives and aliens. So just like the frees that were freed, just like the slaves that were freed in Greek antiquity, the indigenous peoples in the Americas were eventually continued to be subjected to the racialized stratification of membership that these logics engendered, thus giving slavery an aftermath. So Antigone's self-definition as metic is also a speech act in that sense that symbolizes the counter-politics instantiated by strangers today, refugees, undocumented immigrants, non-citizens, as they experience the global conditions of political membership for those ontologically divided between two polities. So, finally, I want to finish by saying that by mobilizing Antigone's metic status to talk about immigrants, not only the immigrants who have like freshly arrived in the UK, but even second and third generation immigrants in the UK as disposable citizens, Elms is able to show this understanding of the dual-tiered conceptualization of citizenship and how this can open up, as I said, a space for political and theatrical coalitions. So maybe I should stop here and I could elaborate more with the questions later on.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ekin. I think you can stay if you like to, so we can answer the question. So I kindly ask also Julia and Sofia to take place here, since there are. See, there's no space. Oh. Grazie. Thank you for outlining some of the problems, and which comes back to Julia's question. Are we talking about transformation or exploitation when discussing and when staging those stories? Here comes the topic of the market, the importance of the market, the commission of a play to a playwright, to a poet. So, any questions in the audience? We have about 5 to 10 minutes to debate. Please, Federica. On the microphone, because we are broadcasting at the moment, otherwise at home they don't hear him.
Thank you. No, just to follow on from your question, so that we really ask it, because I've been taking notes and I think that that's my top note, exploitations versus transformation. I think all of you have touched upon it from the theoretical point of view, from the practical point of view, and from the, let's say, rewriting point of view of a classical myth and a classical play. And I would like to really know more and searching deeper. Tomorrow I'll be speaking from, let's say, a kind of doubt that I do have because of the kind of past experience that we have from, let's say, the Italian migration perspective, and it's where my question is coming from. I'm really curious to hear about, the real potential for real transformation of the contemporary theatrical scene. Thank you.
Well, I think they have to answer. I mean, I'm not in the field of contemporary art itself. I just want to say maybe that when I put on the table this question, for me, it comes from another background that I have, and it's very connected with theater of oppressed. So what I was thinking about is exactly but it's also related to the idea of solidarity, how you practicing it, and sometimes is framed like more a salvation based on compassionate approach, and not really to understand how you are positioning yourself, being an artist or an audience and so on, or looking. And so if we talk about position in a relationship, we can put on the table how we really, so it is a matter, you also put yourself in that relation. So it's not that you are saving something, but you are there to build up a context. As you know, in the dialogical aesthetics, like Kester and so on, he says there is a difference between activating a context or transmitting just a content. So in your example that I think that you shared with us today, it's really really interesting in that sense, because of course there are contents, of course, but how we change the context also, and which type of context we try to activate, also in the relationship, as you say at the end, about community between the performance, the performers and the audiences. So exploitation and transformation is for me, it's related to all different agents and actors, so the artists, the audiences, and so on. And so it's, for me, to really refer to how we work on this difference between activation of the context, transmission of the content, and how much we are conscious and aware, and that when we are not we are not putting question also ourselves in that relation, and we are just doing exploitation in that sense. I don't know if it's clear what I'm saying, but concerning the contemporary art, I think that they have to answer better than me, of course.
I completely agree, but can I also add that I think it's about how the framework we establish and the positionality of the facilitator, but also I truly believe we have to problematize the transformation element of art as well. Applied theater, there's a conversation: is it can it provide transformation or transportation? And there are arguments for and against both. But I think in the case of transformation, for example, who chooses what we're transforming from and into what? It's quite important to establish, again, the positionality of the facilitator. Where do they come from? What is the background? As a result, what are we transforming here? Who is the facilitator? Do they know better about what we should be in case of the previous thing? And communities develop. They don't expect us to help them transform into something. As a result, I think that we have to keep problematizing these terms that claim to be doing things for communities.
Kim, please.
I think there's also sometimes this element that, like, when people are claiming to do participatory theater, they just sometimes only work with local communities, like to form a chorus. But my understanding of participatory theater would be not just to engage a potential portion of the audience, but to be in conversation with the audience throughout the event. The audience being part of the performance, and the performance being part of the audience. So I think it's dialectics between them that kind of makes that space more meaningful in such a context.
Prego, Roberta.
Okay, sorry for my English, but maybe it's not so good. First of all, thank you a lot for this wonderful beginning of this conference, and with 3 very interesting papers, and also the pleasure of seeing in Italy, that is very traditional, our convegno, do you call convegno in English? Transformed, about transformation, seeing 3 young women and researchers sitting there, and so, and also talking of migration.
We are 4, actually. Actually, me too.
And Matteo, who is the inventor of that. I appreciate the fact that, and speaking of migration, I have the opportunity to listen to academic voices that comes also from people who are maybe second generation or with a migration in there. So I I'm really appreciating all this. And they were all interesting with relationship, with papers. I have a question for Sofia Naku. The setting you describe, the tribunal, and the part of narration that is into it, and what you have told about refugee narration. I have listened to something very similar happens with women violated and their narration in tribunal. And it's always interesting, I've worked about that, always interesting comparing the dispositivo narrativo of the tribunal to the dispositivo narrativo of theater, because there is, many times there have been comparison of that. The tribunal dispositivo narrativo is similar to the theater, to dramaturgy dispositivo narrativo. My question is, you made an auspicio, a wish that theater, applied theater dimension could directly be working in tribunal assessment. And my question is, are we sure there are not somewhere in the world examples of applied theater used in a tribunal settings? Because it's very interesting. I wonder whether there have been investigation about that. I wonder whether maybe in what in Italian is called giustizia riparativa, the application of giustizia riparativa. I don't know how you say in English, but there are many there are things done in it, both in South Africa, but also in Italy, in Giustizia Riparativa. Maybe they have used applied theater dimension. I don't know about it. I wonder whether some of you know about it. I found very interesting the experience that you told us about, in Palestine, with free bus and with refugees, but I wonder whether there are other experiences directly into the tribunal setting.
Thank you for your question. There are quite a few cases of applied theatre projects with refugees. So people have already gone through the system. The problem with the system is that it's made to isolate people. It is made to not allow them to work. It is made to move them from places that they know people to places that they don't know people. So as a result, and also it is tricky for them because they don't have legal support yet. It's tricky for them to know what they can share in public without jeopardizing their position within the system. As a result, at least in the UK, where my research takes place, I haven't found any projects that are there to support the people during the system. There are quite a few projects of people after they've gone through the system criticizing it with the refugee status, though. I think it's a very tricky case, and here we get the funding conversation as well. In order to get government funding, you need to present results, you need to present the performance. It's very hard to get government funding, which is the main source of funding in the UK for projects like that, if you don't have a performance in the end. And by putting a performance in the end, you're jeopardizing the asylum claim of the people you're talking with. As a result, I think we need to be very clear on I am talking about the process-based work and support-based work. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it is very difficult to establish projects during the process for this reason.
Giulio, would you like to add something?
Well, no, it's not really connected with this, but I was thinking about some experiences done in the fields of theater oppressed with legislative theater. And so it's something different, but it's try to connect how we can change law concerning different sphere of life, and through also using theater to show and to connect proposal coming also from.
Oh, absolutely. Theater can do that.
And okay. So just that, just to remember this maybe possibility. Yeah.
So we have room for one more question, if any. If we don't, because we don't, we can have a 5 to 10 minutes pause to reflect a bit about ourselves and get back here by 11:35 at the latest to get back and stick to the schedule, which is important. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I would like to welcome here Agata Skripek and Julia Lizurek. Agata is a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Polish Studies at the University of Jagiellonian. Yes, who is preparing her doctoral dissertation on the horizontal models of artistic process in contemporary theatre and performance. And Julie is a graduate in theatre studies from the same university with a master's degree, and she works as an independent theatre critic, theatre teacher, and director. Today, they will be talking to us about theatre and environments, theatre work environments, migration experience as building blocks of artist identity and image. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation and giving us an opportunity to discuss and to present you our ideas on theater work environments and how it influences the work of the immigrants artists here in Poland. So basically, we would speak about the performativity of these working environments.
Yes, and we decided to. I think it's working. Okay, thank you. We decided to speak together in a dialogue because during our discussions, it turned out that we are pretty much interested in the same thing, and this thing is that that is how individual artistic biographies reflect the experience of migration. And we understand that it is too varied to talk about this in general. So we will focus on particular cases, and through particular cases, we can seek for a broader view. But we are also interested in different aspects of this, of it. And Julia is more into practices of independent theater.
Of course, and Agata is more into institutional theater, because in Poland there's like this, like the critics and the historians use this division, like when talking about theater, it's like off theater and institutional theater. Yes, but as Agata said, this division gives us no useful methods and techniques. So we decided to meld the categories and show you a broader view.
And as for establishing our research methods, Julia has conducted interviews with an immigrant artist, and now she's going to present her interpretations of their experience.
Whereas Agata deals with the artist's effigies. What is an effigy? Agata is following Richard Schechner and Joseph Roach, but also Dariusz Kosiński, our teacher, who has invited us to this research team. And an effigy is the only identity we have an access to. So it's like an repertoire of gestures, words, choices, and circumstances that creates an elusive identity, the only picture that we have an access to.
So I will start with my part. I would like to deal with two effigies of two foreign artists that are working in Poland right now. And it is actress Oksana Cherkashna, and she is Ukrainian, and Jana Szostak, who is from Belarus. I'll start with a question. What relationship has been established between Oksana Cherkashna and her working environment, Powszechny Theatre in Warsaw? You can translate Powszechny to common theatre. So Oksana Cherkashna, a former actress of Kyiv Theatre, has been working in Powszechny since January last year. It is a public repertory theatre financed by the city, recognizable abroad as the place where in 2017, Serbian director Olivier Frilic created The Curse, a play about Catholic Church, which caused loud protests and conflicts over religious feelings. Since 2013, i.e. since the change of the management to a more progressive and socially engaged one, its idiom has been theater that gets in a way. And since 2019, it defines itself as a feminist cultural institution. Suffice to say that by accepting the word at powszechny, Czerkaszyna found herself in an institutional environment that publicly declares that it tries to be self-critical, developmental, and caring towards its employees. I should also emphasize that getting a full-time job in theater, especially in the capital, is very difficult to obtain for a large number of graduates of art studies. So Czerkaszyna's interests match the direction the institution is heading. The artist left her theater in her hometown, Kharkiv, because, as she claims, it was too boring for her, and she turned to more independent project. It was said that she was a neurasthenic type of actress, which did not fit the theater and acting under the sign of Stanislavski. On stage, she bursts with affirmative energy. She can be playful, ironic, or even angry. Though the job in repertory theater obviously allows her to play dramatic roles, much more often we see her as a performer speaking in her own name. Czerkaszyna treats theater primarily as a field for emancipation. She guides us through uncomfortable topics. For example, the importance of women's contribution to contemporary theater, the Me Too movement, and the hypocrisy of the authorities. She is also constructively critical of the environment she finds herself in. So, accepting the job at Powszechny, she indicated that she no longer wanted to talk about her national identity on the stage. She did it once, very spectacularly, in 2018, at the theater in Rzeszów, in the performance directed by Katarzyna Szyngiera called We Will Not Give Up the Lions. It was her first appearance in Polish theater. Worth mentioning is that Rzeszów is a medium-sized city located around 100 kilometers from the border with Ukraine, and it welcomes many economic immigrants. Czerkaszyna was engaged to the role of the true Ukrainian woman, which is a concept that dies with the idea of authenticity. I'll give you the true Ukrainian woman, she laughs in a bittersweet tone, and for the rest of the show, she speaks Ukrainian. This way, she unmasks the stereotypes that the audience might want to expect. The concept of authenticity becomes dismantled and juxtaposed with meticulous and journalistic screenwriting work, thanks to which Oksana's performance, a Ukrainian woman who plays Ukrainian woman in Polish theater near the border, reveals the most hidden layers of Polish-Ukrainian xenophobia. In the performances in which she plays nowadays at Powszechny Theatre, the topic of her origins is not discussed. But the situation has slightly changed since the day of Russia's aggression against Ukraine on February 23rd, 2022. Immediately, Czerkaszyna's active patriotic attitude has become a recognizable voice in the media. This voice belongs firstly to an actress, because actors, thanks to their visibility, have the privilege of publicizing important matters. Secondly, this is a female voice, which is of a great importance, considering the fact that approximately 50,000 women serve in the Ukrainian army, which is about 20% of the entire army. For sure, exact numbers are, of course, unknown. Thirdly, this is a voice of a respectable immigrant who persuades people in numerous interviews to help the arriving Ukrainians to send money to the army and to appeal to Western leaders to close the skies over Ukraine. Though she is not addressing her nationality in the content of the plays, each of her stage statements seems to be now current and allusive. Thus, she liberated her image, her effigy, from the shackles of the colonizing narrative, which she thought while working on her first Polish performance. She took it over. This way, she also helps the Powszechny Theatre to fulfill the assumptions of a feminist cultural institution, as it supports her initiatives, provides her with a stable financial situation, and security in case of any battue. Moving on to Jana Szostak, I would like to emphasize that she is a performer of such a classic old school version. What I mean that is her interventions take place in a public, meaningful spaces, and random people can get involved in them. Her actions are characterized by a strong political message. She demands decisive actions by European institutions against the regime of Alexander Lukashenko. She criticizes the superficiality of the Polish government's actions, in particular pushbacks in the forest of the Polish-Belarusian border. I would like to briefly recall a couple of her performances with which she most strongly affected the imagination of her audience. The first is participation in the regional beauty contests. Assuming that this is this kind of event that attracts many people in front of their TVs, Jana Szostak decided to use her appearance to tell them about the newcomers from Belarus. Alas, her emancipatory message was repeatedly disrupted. When she finally won the title of Miss and was given the floor, the organizers found her message drastically diverged from the accepted convention of the competition. The coordinator of the regional contest forbade her to participate in the next ones, and so Szostak ended her career as a Miss. The second distinct action is Scream for Belarus. On August 9th, 2020, the first presidential election in the history of Belarus took place. Their falsified result caused mass protests. The protesters have been and continue to be persecuted by the regime. It was on their behalf that Szostak started coming every day at 6 p.m. to the building of the European Commission representation in Warsaw to scream for a minute. Within the few days, she was joined by many other people who wanted to express their opposition with her. This was also reenacted on her behalf at the Forum of the Lux Audience Award in the European Parliament in Strasbourg by Bartosz Bielenia, an influential Polish actor. His gesture made me realize that Szostak's scream is not only to be sent to Poles or Polish government, but to break into ears of the entire Western world. According to this logic, I should also scream here for 1 minute, since I am in a way her envoy in here. But my throat chakra is now very close because of the stress, so I can't scream. But let's assume I did it, though I didn't.
Let's imagine.
Yes, let's imagine. In her interventions, Szostak consciously uses her appearance. We might want to take a look at her. And she's as you can see, very thin, tall, and normatively attractive person with such a Slavic type of girl with a long blonde braid and big blue eyes and open face. And apparently I'm not the only one who notices that, because after the first Scream for Belarus, the press commented negatively, not on her message, but on her outfit and her look. What drew their attention was her lack of a bra underneath the dress. Indeed, under certain circumstances, not wearing a bra is a significant feminist gesture of emancipating the female body from the male gaze. But that time, that was not the point. However, using the accidental publicity of her cleavage issue, Szostak intercepted the tabloid's narrative by creating her own initiative under the hashtag Cleavage for Belarus. What she failed to do in the beauty contest, here she returns with a vengeance. The action Cleavage for Belarus is a topless plus cats photo session for the calendar, which was attended by well-known Polish women who also wanted to publicize the case. Apart from the photos, on each page of the calendar, there is a list with the names of Belarusian prisoners, political prisoners. Not to mention that it is another adoption of the patriarchal custom of hanging calendars in private men's spaces. Finally, Jana Szostak became a resident of the Hub Culture program in a Warsaw non-governmental institution called Komuna Warszawa, Commune Warsaw, which sustains its activities with grants. This place is famous for its favor towards young artists entering the profession who would like to experiment with the idea in the safe laboratory conditions. In an ephemeral performance, Screamer, Stand Up for Your Rights comedy, She describes her artistic activity. First, in a joking tone, she speaks about her Miss career, then about Scream for Belarus, and then, with increasing engagement, she moves to the topic of her activism, speaking about rescuing those hiding in forests near the border and about troubles with helping refugees, or, should I say, newcomers, to adapt to a new home in Poland. She follows a certain strategy, and I quote, "Sometimes I pretend to be a lawyer, sometimes a mother, sometimes a Pole. I will be whatever person it takes to awaken solidarity in you." Thus, she problematized the changeability and fluidity of the effigy with which she tries to gain visibility. She reveals a deep awareness of how powerful a performance based on managing one's femininity can be, regardless of whether it's well or badly conducted. And I say badly conducted because from an organizational and artistic point of view, stand-up for your rights comedy was a failure. Szostak's inexperienced as an actress scheduled 2 shows in a row. So by delaying the first for about 30 minutes, she automatically delayed the second one for about an hour. And she, on stage, she seems to be shy. She kept forgetting the lines. The spectacle was too long, the dramaturgy was inept, and the jokes only amused the most polite ones. To be sincere, yes. Szostak may have been tired, may have been actually tired, but she certainly performed it well. She showed us the exhaustion and distraction of performing for a small, sophisticated audience at Komuna Warszawa, while behind the scenes, there are a dozen missed urgent calls waiting for her from people whom she helps. Her exhibited fatigue was also a systemic fatigue of an overworked girl who carries the whole world on her shoulder. Thus, she shows at the same time her fragility and bluntness, her naivety and perspicacity. However, we may wonder if this time Szostak did not miss with her game with visibility. Komuna's audience belonged to the already convinced one, to the feminist, civic educated group, which does not need much explanation. Perhaps that is why, or perhaps simply because it was one-time show, the spectacle went rather unnoticed. It's a pity, but it's also a lesson. Would you like to continue?
Yes, because this one-time show, one-time situation is very common for the Polish non-institutional theater, or theater, alternative theater, as you can call it as well, which usually, but not always, has smaller funds for its activities and cultural work. In this part of our presentation, I want to show you some artistic groups and how they can differ, considering art forms, professionalism, or claimed aims. I want to think about theater as a place to share some experiences. An example of such experience can be migration experience. How does it feel to be an immigrant? How can you connect with the citizens of the country where you live? What is the difference in the way they treat you? Is it possible to talk about the habitus of the immigrant? I think that analysis of art, artistic and social performances can bring us closer to these questions, answers. This is why I talked to two Ukrainian actors, Nastya Medvedeva and Oleg Nesterov, who arrived in Poland in 2013 and 2014 for the invitation of Theatre Brama to the northwest of Poland. It's like a small town, Goleniów. Theatre Brama was then and still is considered, is still the conductor of the European Voluntary Service, and they host new young artists every year. They give an opportunity to create so-called social theater, for which the most crucial concept is creating community, which has been mentioned a lot on this conference so far. Maybe it is a simplification, but we can assume when someone joins the Brama team, they imagine that they become a part of this community. However, the story of Nastya and Oleg is the story about rejection and exclusion. What was the mechanism of this rejection and exclusion? Firstly, inclusion, invitation to become permanent theater members as an extension of being a volunteer. Therefore, they were recognized as theater Brahmas actors, not as Ukrainians or immigrants. And it's like really important thing. Secondly, they wanted to be recognized as individuals, as artists with diverse experiences, which turned out to be very difficult. Thirdly, the decision to loosen a relationship with Brahma has consequences of being accused of betrayal. Nastya said ironically to me, and I will quote her now, "I am a Brahma refugee, but it is impossible to escape from Brahma. But it is impossible to end a relationship with Brahma." So it's like a toxic partner. What is meaningful for me is the expression of theater work experience as a political act of leaving a place where you are in danger, or where it is impossible to function on the demanded standard of living. Nastya and Oleg described themselves as permanent immigrants, artists who do not have their own place to live and create. The only way to abandon their refugee identity is to lose their individuality for the hosting group, theater, or artist community. Do they deal with these issues with the artistic identity when creating performances? No. However, it impacts their idea of what art should be about. As long as there's nothing more horrifying than war, than the war itself, it is impossible to reflect the horror in the theater. But artists can do something opposite, as they claim. They can create asylums or build agreement and understanding with the audience about this topic. But still, there is a group which deals with the topics of war and extermination in Poland. They have brought it up before it was an obvious theme to work with before the Ukrainian war. The beginning of the free part of Theater Czar, yes, is dated 2013. Each of three performances is based on polyphonic songs or monodies from Asia Minor, Anatolia, Iran, Persia, or Turkey. The original idea was to invite singers who, it is a tradition, singing those songs, and be taught, and the actors and performance of Czar Theater were taught the songs by them. The multicultural team of Theater Czar was in the process, which they called the memory carrying process, referring to the Holocaust post-memory and the obligation of artists to witness this difficult past and heritage. For example, Armenia's Sister, which you can see the picture above me, was dedicated to Armenian history and culture. Polish, English, Ukrainian, Italian, and Armenian actors sang for the victims of the Armenian genocide, which happened between 1915 and 1917, even before the Holocaust. The songs become familiar and foreign at the same time during the same performance. I'm focusing right now on this music layer of Armenia's Sister to prove that thinking about the soundscape and being in the community created by the sounds impacts an idea of a human in the world where war and ecological catastrophes as reasons for migrations are inevitable. They could even affect human extermination. Asking ourselves about the reasons for migration helps us to prepare for these circumstances, as like we can all be immigrants in a second. On the other hand, represents a human as a migrating being. How does this vision is performed in the last show, the third part of the project stage in 2022? Medas Moirai, can you show me the picture? So this is a set for this performance. Gasoline canisters filled with water are transported over a ship's deck or a ruined house. The leading actor makes a sea journey to find another land, or maybe he wants to start a new life, or maybe he wants to conquer with strength, power, and violence another land. Everyone and everything produce a lot of noise. We hear shouting, mourning, and crashing. Medea sings her grieving songs. Eventually, when the ship or the house is lifted, an audience sees the rectangle hall, as you can see there. And there are a lot of worms, like moving worms, inside this pool. So there's no human in the end. Just the idea that everything will have been left after us is the movement of the insects. And the insects, the worms, are considered to be a modern Moirai. As you can imagine, it is a giant, expensive production. However, this version of the show, Medas Moiras, has been developed because of the absence of the performance. The singers who has originally created the performance's soundscape. Because Medas Moiras is considered by its creators to be a performative installation rather than the performance, an alteration of the performance staging voices of modern refugees. This absence connected also to the lost stable funding of theater becomes some kind of a prediction or a prophecy for me. And the last example, my last example, concerns the experience of Ukrainian children refugees who became artists in the project called Lato w Teatrze, Summer in the Theatre. The name speaks for itself. Among 69 projects funded by the Ministry of Culture and National Heritage was organized by Teatr Układ Formalny from Wrocław and was called Brave in the Everyday Life. A formulated aim of the 2-week half holidays was to integrate separate environments of natives, of Polish and immigrants, Ukrainians, to teach children how to behave, like conscious and responsible citizens. During the workshops, the group was creating its own language, which they could use to communicate. In the final performance, they were unified so they can fight against a bad wizard. Why are these two events connected? If you want to coexist with somebody who doesn't speak your language, you need to invent other ways to understand one. And it's worth making an effort if you have the same aim. The context I've just mentioned is obvious to everyone who lived in Poland in March 2022, when lots of Ukrainian people escaped from the country because of the war, of course, and decided to stay for a moment or to live permanently in Poland. They often needed to struggle with intolerance among Poles, which is not pleasant and common thing to say. That's why I find this project of Układ Formalny so important. The organizers have given children the opportunity not only to meet, but also to imagine the world that they would like to live in. And I want to say about one scene, almost the final one. We see a king who sits by himself on the armchair. He seems lonely and tired. He wears a black mask. Children start to recall good memories about free time spent with a family, the appearance of the newborns, and their first words about learning to ride a bicycle, saving one's goods from bandits, or celebrating birthdays. When they recalling these memories, King's mask gradually falls down. And a bright, happy mask appears on his face. After that, the actors take away a black cover foil, the sign of a sad, cruel world. However, in the next scene, we meet those who have lost their relatives because of this bad wizard. They also hide their faces behind the masks. Despite the happy ending of the show, of defeating the bad wizard, it is impossible to forget the fact that it's impossible during the war, during the fight, to avoid victims. And the children gently and powerfully remind us about it. So yes, so basically what we wanted to end with is that, of course, we discussed the situation of immigrant artists, but we are interested in not only about like the environments and how does the artists function here, but if their work and like investigating their situation can tell us something about the theater's ability for building a diverse and tolerant society. So it's like the most important question we have for you. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I really feel that all of that talks quite a lot to everything we discussed earlier as well about community and about different voices and about putting platforms where they should be. Amazing. Thank you. Can I invite Irene Ross here? Irene is a mother of two, a theater director, a theater and performance practitioner, and a researcher. And currently she is undertaking her PhD at Edinburgh University. Today she will be talking to us about Italian theater abroad and institutional support. Put your money where your culture is.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. So yes, my paper is called Italian Theatre and Institutional Support, Put Your Money Where Your Culture Is. Thank you. And my intention is to look at the Italian theatre productions that were on one hand advertised in the past 10 years by the Italian Cultural Institutes in the UK and sponsored since 2017 when actually the Italian Cultural Institutes had to put their budgets online. And the research question is, what portrayal of Italianità, Italianness, is more likely to be endorsed by these institutions? So far, as far as I know, let's say, it's the only research going in this direction. I will also draw from this recent article from Giuliana Muscio, East Coast, West Coast, the long tradition of Italian immigrant performers, in which Giuliana Muscio investigates the Italian theater in the Americas between 1890 and 1940. And she also looks at the fusion between Italian theater and other local theater. And I quote, "Although remaining quintessentially Italian, the spettacolo show performance did not resist a kind of grafting with American culture, interacting with other ethnic and racial communities." So similarly, kind of, I look at what audience the Italian cultural institutes are addressing, and also what is their understanding of live performance, the understanding of the cultural institutes. So, in terms of sources, on the advertising side, I look at the section events on the Italian Cultural Institute's websites, and I also had some inputs from some employees. And here you can see the, I won't talk about this, the 2 pages of the Italian Cultural Institutes. In terms of what they sponsor, the sources are the section Avvisi Bandi di Gara on the websites of the 2 Italian cultural institutes and the ministerial website of Interior Affairs and International Cooperation. So here is more interesting. So as you can see, this is the page of the Italian Cultural Institute of Edinburgh. You can see listed the different years and the contracts from the different years, but very often they lead to this page saying, oops, there is no content. So yes. And this is the ministerial website. Again, a list of the years. You can click on the years and voila. So you get to this very, very messy page, an XML page, with the list, very comprehensive list of all the expenses of all the Italian cultural institutes in the world. So to find some data, of course, you can use some keywords. You can use teatro, performance, spettacolo. You can look for London and Edinburgh, but still it's very messy because there are expenses again from the paper for the printer to the performances, and yeah. So my question was, do I have a lot of data or no data at all? So to try to tidy up my data, I decided to start from the events listed on the Italian Cultural Institutes. So at least I had an idea of what they were interested in advertising, if not sponsored. So I identified 4 categories. So theater with a pedagogical goal, children theater, theater about migration, and playwriting. So first of all, I wanted to address the context. So I wanted to have a look at if and how the cultural institutes interacted with the theatrical culture of their cities. So here are 2 pictures of Edinburgh during the Edinburgh Fringe. If you don't know it, the Edinburgh Fringe is a fringe festival happening during the month of August for international theater. And so what happens during the month of August is that everybody living in Edinburgh leaves the city. They rent out their flats, they rent out their houses, they make a lot of money. And on the other hand, the poor performers spend around, on average, £2,000 a week for the accommodation and to hire the venue. Because of course there is an artistic direction for each venue, but even if you are selected, you have to pay for the venue. So you might question why are they doing so? So for several reasons. So people go through this kind of trouble because they want to get a theater review, they want to find a producer, they want to meet, as you can see here, artistic directors or venue programmers and so on, because they want to tour their performances. So someone knows, okay. So a first finding of my research, based again on the data I had, was that there wasn't any Italian performance in the Edinburgh Fringe which was sponsored by the Italian Cultural Institute of Edinburgh. And you might think maybe it's a matter of quality. No, it's not. So here you can see 2 very successful performances. The one on the left is Made in Ilva, which is a show by a company from Bologna, actually, talking about the tragedy of the steel factory in Ilva. And the one on the right is La Merda, the shit, You know it, I'm very happy. So both these two performances won many prizes at the Edinburgh Fringe. They were very well received by the audience, very well received by the critics. And they came back actually to Edinburgh, and they came back to the Fringe, but they did not receive any support. So what does the Edinburgh Fringe, the Edinburgh Cultural Institute support? Well, first of all, I want to say they don't sponsor the Italian performances at the Fringe. What they do, though, they create these events in which they help the Italian companies to network with a producer or, amongst themselves. And in a few occasions, I found in my data that they financed some videos produced to promote these performances. So where they actually put the money? They put the money on opera and on jazz and blues. So very, very easily. So these are only two examples, the orchestra and chorus of the Teatro Legge di Torino and this band Rumba de Bodas. I found more puzzling the second thing, the fact that they promote jazz and blues companies, groups, because I didn't know that Italy was such a country for blues and jazz. And so this interesting music was actually shared between the Italian Cultural Institute of Edinburgh and of London, and it could be noticed immediately during the pandemic. So one of the first initiatives sponsored was the Estate l'Italiana Festival, a showcase, as you can see here, a showcase of Italian cultural heritage, in which, again, opera was kind of the protagonist, very classical opera. So actually, the Italian Cultural Institute of London has shown during the years more interest in theatre than the institute in Edinburgh. For instance, through this initiative, this Speciale Pippo del Bono, so a series of performances broadcasted during the pandemic, funnily enough, all about death. So if you don't know Pippo del Bono, he is a performance maker who, let's say, he became famous by working with non-professionals with disabilities and let's say long-term collaborations with non-professionals. So you might wonder what is the London scene like. So this is a screenshot of 2.4 kilometers in London out of an area of 1,572 kilometers. And the red dots are theaters. So the scene is, again, very fragmented, very chaotic, very brutal. So there isn't a fringe. There are many fringes, actually. There are many independent venues, and the same applies as for the Edinburgh Fringe. So if you want to get your show into a venue, an independent venue, you have to hire the venue, because they actually count on that to survive. Yes. So what I found in my research is that the events that are supported from the Italian Cultural Institute of Edinburgh and the Italian Cultural Institute of London are almost always events that happen in absence of the live performance. And I will quote some. So let me find it. So there is an interest in playwriting more than in live performance. So, for instance, in 2017 and 2018, the Italian Cultural Institute of London supported an initiative called Contemporary. So the first year, it was a cycle of events dedicated to Italian contemporary theatre with readings from quite classical text. The second year, it was a series of meetings about theatre, not even readings, but meetings about theatre. Then in 2019, as you can see here, they launched Italy Uncovered. And I quote from the website, so new plays from Italy, which brought a new generation of Italian playwrights to the UK with rehearsed readings of 5 different surprising new plays, showing a different side to this marvelous, contradictory, and turbulent country. And also, I find it very interesting, the Institute of London reports on the dedicated page that the project mirrors a new renaissance in Italian playwriting. So we always draw back from a golden era of Italy, which is the Renaissance. So yeah, do you see the irony of it? So this was an event promoted by the Italian Cultural Institute of Edinburgh, the launch of this book about Dario Fo and Franca Rame called Theatre, Politics and Life. So yes, I find it super ironic because, again, the theater they actually advertise and they promote has no life, unfortunately, and no politics. So again, to be fair, the Italian Cultural Institute of London promoted 2 seasons of an Italian theatre festival, which stopped because of the pandemic. And it was interesting for me to look at the kind of plays that they promoted. And they were all from playwriters born between 1893, Gadda, and 1936, Maraini, the only living writer. And similarly, in regard to the student productions, very often they are based on very classical texts from either long gun or contemporary writers. These are 2 examples of the Italian play. So the Italian play is a project happening at the University of Edinburgh in which students who are studying Italian language perform in Italian. And this is another very interesting event I found out about. In this case, this is a documentary, but it was based on a workshop and on a performance that happened with the prisoners of a prison in Belfast. So they taught Italian language to these prisoners, and after that they performed Novecento by Baricco. So yes, in these cases, I found very interesting the fact that the pedagogical goal is actually to teach Italian language, and it brings me to the children theater. So in regard to the children theater, as you can see here, they are kind of amateur productions, but they are actually sponsored by the Italian Cultural Institute in London. And it seems to be the only case in which they are really interested in the live performance and in the presence of the audience to create kind of temporary collectivities, temporary communities. And again, I would claim that the goal is to create new generations of Italian speakers, to cultivate the language in Italian children living abroad. So this company is called Compagnia Tricolore, funded by a British-Italian woman. And I use that to bridge to the other category, which is the one with migration stories. So Compagnia Tricolore in 2015 performed Saffron Hill, a performance about Italian migrants living in London in between 1870 and 1960. So a long time ago. It was the first performance about Italian migration. So the first one I found about was A Bench on the Road. It was a result of a research commissioned in 2012 by the University of Edinburgh. And again, it talks about Italian migrants living in Scotland. And the other show, Tally's Blood, was performed in 2019, and it was a students' production with students from the University of Edinburgh. And again, talking about that kind of era and Italian migrants living in Scotland. So yes, they all talk about either successful stories of migrants who settled in the UK and had their own business and were well integrated in a way. Or on the other hand, they talk about the Arandora Star. I don't know if you know about it. I certainly didn't when I moved to the UK. So basically, at the beginning of the Second World War, Italian and German nationals who had been living in the UK, in some cases for a long time, were just shipped to Canada in this boat. because they were accused of being Nazis or fascists. And funnily enough, we can only laugh about it after all these years, it was sunk by German bombs. So here you go. So this is another initiative that links all this interest in the culture of theater, so theater in absence of theater, and migration. So this is an initiative of the Italian Cultural Institute of London. It's called Performing Italy. And it's a series of short interviews, around 15 minutes, with so-called new Italians, so Italian with a migrant background, who work in the Italian industry, in the Italian theater and performance industry. So certainly it is a very worthy initiative, showing how Italian people can also be tolerant, can also be welcoming for people from different cultures. On the other hand, again, I find it a bit ironic because it didn't match with an interest in Italian performance or Italian performance makers living abroad, being immigrant on the other side of the channel, or Italian performances actually touring the UK. And again, what would Franca and Dario say about it? About the fact that, actually the live performance and the political performance is totally ignored. So a question that actually was brought to me by this research is, do we even believe in political transformative theater? And I say we, but I'm talking about the Italian Cultural Institutes, of course. And also, can we or they dare an artistic direction? Because even in some cases in which they advertised some Italian performers in the UK, it was only through the artistic direction of someone else. So there isn't an artistic direction in the Italian Cultural Institutes, in the events that they promote or advertise. So this is hopefully not a conclusion, but a reading. So what I can say about this research, I think that the Italian Cultural Institutes are not addressing an international audience interested in Italian theater, but only interested in Italian culture. Also, I found quite interesting, quite problematic actually, the fact that it seems that they think that Italian contemporary migrants, Italian immigrants, are not educated enough in the language of contemporary theater and performance. So what they give us is, very traditional theater in a very traditional form with traditional playwriters. So what they advertise is not contemporary Italian performance. And I wonder if it's because live performance is not considered political enough, in a way as in the previous panel they were talking about, in the way that theater can create communities, or if it is too political to be sponsored. And so it's better to delegate the artistic direction to someone else. And so I suggest that they are stuck in this dichotomy between dichotomy, as Phelan would say, or schism, as Nelson would say, in the Western tradition, between theory and practice. So between the culture of language and the culture of practice, the knowledge and the knowing. And also that, I say again, we, let's say we. So we possibly suffer from delusion of grandeur, or what could be called as cultural imperialism. So what they promote, again, there was just a little image of the Arlecchino before, but also I didn't mention because of the time, but they advertised a lot of Commedia dell'arte. And Commedia dell'arte was actually called, and I quote, an art form that influenced all the other forms of theater to come. So it seemed that what they are interested in advertising is either something that, influenced all other forms to come in all the other nations internationally, or in something very folkloristic. So it's either opera or the Neapolet well, canzoni from Napoli, songs from Naples. So something that actually reminds this fragmented past of Italy, maybe, very folkloristic, very close to nature. Again, a very disturbing concept of culture. And I question, can Italian theater be international? Oops, sorry. Can Italian theater be international? Yes, it can. So here you can see 2 performances which traveled the world, not thanks to the Italian Cultural Institutes in the UK, in some other cases with Italian Cultural Institutes from other countries. So yes, I think that Italian contemporary performance can enter in a dialogue with contemporary performances from other countries, but it's just not the kind of performance that the institutions want to endorse. And on the other hand, I think that Italian performers coming in the UK independently, let's say, so financed by someone else, they don't even reach out to the Italian Cultural Institutes because they are possibly afraid of being tagged as Italian performers because of this kind of tag existing thanks to what the Italian Cultural Institutes and other institutions advertise about Italian performance and theater. So what do I want? Because I've complained a lot. So what I would like, I would like to see Italian institutes abroad actually supporting Italian performers living abroad or touring abroad. Here on the top you have a picture of Alessandra Ferrini, who has just won the Maxi Bulgari Prize. She is based in London and she's never seen a dime from the Italian Cultural Institute of London. I was actually surprised I found her name in the messy form you saw from the earlier slides. But yes, she was sponsored by another cultural institute in some other country to show her work. And on the bottom, you see Cecilia Guidotti, who wrote Il piano della felicità a few years ago, which is an amazing story about being a migrant, being an immigrant in the UK now. So I'd like to see on stage actually stories about contemporary migration, because I think it's very relevant, it's very relatable, and it's something that could actually be embodied. We were talking about theater as an embodied form of art, but when we are talking about the migrant stories that they actually advertise and support, they are not embodied anymore. They are stories from a long time ago, still worth to be told, but not embodied at all. And yes, and I will close with this. I will read it out because it's a very beautiful sentence. Art is more vital when it provides a means for disrupting our habits and for involving us in a new becomings which do not conform to our current opinions. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I think every presentation should finish with, so what I want is, incredible. Can I invite Agatha and Julia back on the panel, please? Yeah. And I would like to open the floor for questions for any of our speakers.
Thank you for your presentations that call for the political dimension and the role of cultural diplomacy in somehow both of the presentations call for the role of politics and cultural diplomacy in terms of circulation of the arts. And my question for Irene regarding her research is in terms of budget, do you have any idea of how they allocate those two institutes? Because as you said, this is a perspective focused on two specific institutes out of a network of 86 or over the world. So you criticize, and rightly so, their production and their cultural activity as regards to theater, to the performing arts, the living performing arts, and not the performing arts in our past. And hopefully we are far away from that past. So the question is, in your research, we've seen how difficult it is to find data about budgets, but I'd like to know more about how much they allocate for theater and for this idea of theater, of this old-fashioned, very old-fashioned narrative of Italian performing arts. How much do these production costs in percentage compared to the whole budget, and how do they spend most of their budgets, in case it is the most, if you have any idea of that? Thank you.
Yes, I created a fantastic book. So I have a spreadsheet with all the all the expenses that I found relevant for my research. So let's say that for opera, they could spend £5,000 for a production to tour abroad. Or in the case of jazz and blues, they were actually supporting a series of artists performing at the festival, the Jazz and Blues Festival, and it was considerably less. So in some cases, it was the same sum, like £5,000, but for 5 artists. And then something I found very interesting was that there was a big difference between the amount of money they give to musicians who are performing in front of an ambassador, for instance, with closed door, very likely, and the money they actually give to performers who perform in front of an audience, of a normal audience. And you ask where they put a lot of money. So actually, I found out that if I'm not wrong, last year, the Cultural Institute of Edinburgh spent something like £80,000 for an exhibition. I don't remember, I think it was about Raffaello. I could be wrong. But what I found very interesting was that they spent the money, a consistent amount of money in receiving the exhibition and in sending it out. So I wonder why, for instance, they spent, why the one receiving the exhibition has to also spend something like £12,000 to then send it to the next recipient. So yeah, but I will definitely put a link to all the data in my paper.
So thank you, though. Because just to make some discussion, I have a previous experience as a cultural attaché for the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That's why I'm asking, because maybe the problem they have in their poor production of Italian theater and somehow misleading of the image of Italian theater at all, of contemporary Italian theater at all, is the result of budgetary cuts. I mean, if you just have £1,000 to produce the idea and create the idea of Italian culture abroad, I think it's almost impossible to produce a new production of contemporary theater and make it move to England, to Scotland in that case. I mean, if those are the ciphers we're talking about, with £5,000, you cannot even pay the tickets for a company to move. And maybe, I don't want to spend words in their favor, of course, but maybe that's the best they can do with that budget. Perhaps that's an hypothesis. And another topic I'd like to address in that regard is that that attention to the Italian language and Italian lesson and courses of Italian language, which also connects to the Italian production of sketches and these shows for children, basically, connected to the courses, is based on is the result of another budgetary politic, because most of the incomes they come from the language courses. And probably this is the best they can do to make those things together. They can do better, of course, but still.
The thing is, when I see like more than £1,000 on a buffet for the artists going to the Fringe, I think, well, actually, you could have done some artistic direction and decide, actually, I'm going to invest this £1,000 on La Merda, for instance, which a few years ago won many, many prizes. So it's all about how you spend them, even the crumbles you have.
to say the opposite.
Yeah.
I want to intervene on the same with two questions for Irene Ross. The first is just to know how you came to this topic. I mean, I'm learning through Matteo Paoletti that theater and cultural diplomacy is very interesting area of investigation, but I want to know how you got to it, why you started this research. Second, this research based on data, did you think of maybe also use some methodologies of working on the field, for example, making interviews to the responsible of Italian Institute of Cultures, because that would be interesting to also to use interviews. And third, I want to also to say, try an hypothesis different from that of Matteo, but when you write in your conclusion, it was stated, Italian immigrants are not considered educated in the language of contemporary theater and performance. I wonder, I have maybe hypothesis is they are, the people working with Italian cultural institutes are not so much educated in the language of contemporary theater performance. It is a matter of ignorance. There is a matter of ignorance. I think that maybe they don't know about not only Italian, but contemporary theater performance. They have not a frequentation of, for example, Italian theater performance travels a lot abroad, as you said, through the international festivals that are an European network. So if the people in the cultural institutes are not connected with, so maybe there could be space for positive actions about educating the people in Italian cultural institutes, in the institutes, not only Italian, about in contemporary performance. Maybe it's not a problem of a very conscious politics, but of ignorance, maybe.
No, I definitely thought about that. I didn't dare to say it in the presentation. But yeah.
Ciao Irene. So continuing the Edinburgh conversation, if I may, because it's really, in a sense, we're talking also about Italian culture traveling abroad, and we happen to be in Italy, and for us, Edinburgh people, it's by now fairly unusual. So here we are. I wanted to dialogue with the comments that have been made so far. The Italian Institute is one of the many, if you want, issues about the circulation of Italian culture abroad. Certainly it represents the institutional take on Italian culture, and I would tend to agree up to a point to one of the last lines in your final or pre-final slide about the suffering from delusional cultural imperialism, because I think that combines really well in the case of Italy, and it will be part of my topic tomorrow, with actually real subalternity. These people, and I would generally refer to this, the Italian government, the Italian, political scene, the Italian self-awareness, in a sense, on the international scene is fairly marked by this subalternity rather than cultural imperialism, or maybe the two combined rather than just the one. And if there is something that the Italian Institute represents, is exactly that subalternity, i.e. we think that opera is the greatest thing that Italy invented, hence it must please the, let's say, foreign audiences, hence this is the one thing that we still put on the plate. The servile image of Italy is actually very active in our imperial culture, cultural imperialism, and I'm very concerned about this. And, talking about the only theater that is represented either through, say, the student productions, and I'll be talking about those tomorrow, or whether through the official channels of the Italian Institute, are actually, in a sense, reinforcing this. Finally, maybe on the Institute itself, is that they also serve, and I use the word serve, the kind of, and Matteo will confirm this, there are touring companies that have been selected politically for some reasons at source, and they circulate on the network. So you get, what San Francisco gets at some point, what New York gets at some point. So it comes to Edinburgh, having been to other places and having received that let's say, government support from source. So that's another perspective still. But I do agree entirely with the kind of very frustrated picture that you put to us, because having been there for a long time, I've been very frustrated by a series of directors. Sorry, Matteo.
I agree with you. I spoke for the devil, of course. You know. What can I say? In that regard, I agree with you. If you take, you can see at a glance the people that were chosen to stage to perform the idea of contemporary Italian people. They're all the same names you find in the national theaters, basically. There they are, because they were selected by the Ministry of Culture on a shady basis, to say the least. And I completely agree with you. So about cultural imperialism, I slightly disagree, because we are not to that point of success in nowadays debate. I mean, we are struggling to get back to a position we lost centuries ago. And that's the problem of politics. Of course, Italian cultural elites, for our foreign colleagues that maybe don't know, they are a body of embassies, Italian embassies abroad. And they depend from embassies. They are not independent bodies. And therefore, all budgetary provisions, contributions, and the policy has to stay in line with official foreign policies coming from Rome. So they have to struggle for that. And what you said is true. Maybe, perhaps they are afraid of what a contemporary artist can say.
That is always the problem with Italian culture abroad. Basically, we are afraid of being too modern. We are afraid of being too modern, and that's a problem. That's what I call subalternity. Italy is not expected to be the most modern it can be. It can be Renaissance. Renaissance Italy is absolutely fine.
Exactly.
It can maybe even 1960s design when it comes to buying, you know, Alessi's stuff. But when it comes to anything after that, or even prior to that, and even more daring than Alessi's fruit juicer, I mean, it's really difficult. And basically, it's not acceptable to be more modern than that. And that's the problem of subalternity, you know, preparing the product for the foreign, let's say, audience that will buy it.
But that was exactly my point when I was talking about, you know, the fact that even when promoting new playwriters, they were mentioning the new Renaissance. So Renaissance is always the term of reference for everything. And there was nothing after that. Even though we can talk about Dario Fo, we can talk about him, but we can't perform him.
Okay, I'm very sorry. It would be not about Italian theater, but my colleagues mentioned Teatr Powszechny in Warsaw, yes, and it's a very interesting place. It's very interesting theater because it's the theater which opens space for immigrants. And there is even group of activists working there, not theater people, not performers. It's called Zone of Independent Words, Independent Speech, which exist, which organize a lot of performative strategies. They use these performative strategies to help immigrants to feel comfortable in Poland. They organize a lot of performative dramas, etc., etc. And we should also remember that, especially after 2015, Matteo told that we talk about like something between politics and art. In Poland, refugees after 2015, when we have this conservative government, it was a problem. It's time when the most powerful person in Poland, Kaczyński, said that refugees brings insects, so we should be careful. So it was difficult even to imagine, yes. And this theater opened the space. It's a group of people consist of not just Ukrainian, but also people from Belarus, from Syria, and others. They cooperate together. They try to give these people space for integration, that also making performances not inside the theater, outside, in whole Warsaw. You should also remember that this theater is located in the most conservative part of Warsaw. Working people, usually people who vote for this conservative party, yes? So the powszechny theater, it's very important. Of course, Oksana Cherkashina, it's part of this, but they did also many other things very important. That's what I would like to just say. Thank you.
I have a little question for Agatha and Julie as well. You mentioned about the event in the Comuna venue, that it was mainly performed to people that were already converted, they're already part of this community. And I think that is an issue with applied theater, political theater, theater in general. We're preaching to the choir. Did the artists you talked to or you through your research have any suggestions or discussions around how we can move past that?
That's an interesting question, because when you get the residency in Komuna Warszawa, you are in this place when you want to be, and you don't care much about the other people. And I think that is what Jana Szostak is doing. She's somehow linking her performative actions with each other. So from the Miss to Scream for Belarus, from the Scream for Belarus to Cleavage for Belarus. And in her performance Screamer, she said about all her career, her previous career. And I think she wanted to influence people of Komuna Warszawa, because this is a sophisticated, as I said, it's a sophisticated and small audience, but it's also an audience of people who are in some kind of activistic power, those people who have their own initiative among the society. And I think she wanted to present herself as a good contact, as a person who can help, as a person with some acquaintances. And I think that it was this kind of transaction. But as for because Komuna Warszawa, that is a very, very ephemeral, produces very ephemeral kind of spectacles. So I don't think that this is the place to say things really out loud to the popular audience. I think TVs, as Szostak did while doing the Miss, the TV was this good medium. Yeah, I don't know. How about, what do you think?
I want to say that the theater I'm interested in, it's like, it's not only about making performances, but like making performances and making art is some kind of part of, creating a community. So it's like basically that. So of course it's a question if like Theater Brama, it's like a small town, and there's a group of people who like to spend time there with the artists around, like participate in the workshops and going to the cafe, which is in the theater. And it's like also always a question if like what is their experience with the immigrants, if they want to like become a friends with the immigrants, or they don't treat, they start to treat the immigrants as like not as an someone like a stranger, but someone who is I don't know how to say it, like of course it's like it's fluid, you know, because it's always a question if you want to. It's like becoming a friend of an immigrant, change your perspective if you can become a friend if you are convinced to someone's ideas. And no.
Thank you very much.
Just one word about Komuna Warszawa. It's amazing place, very interesting, because I think this is like the center of experimental culture in Warsaw, because there is a lot of different activities, not just theater, yes, but also music, etc., etc. So I think this is good place for communication with young, active generation of people. It's interesting because it's located in school, and it's absolutely, it's so experimental that I'm just shocked that it could exist now in this conservative government in this place. It's cool. But so this is good place for communication with this young audience, young people who are probably the most influenced now. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank
I'd like to say one thing about Komuna Warszawa, because recently I've spoken to Marta Kyle, who was the curator about 2 years ago, curator of the season, and we were speaking about something else, but I just asked her about her whole program, and she said to me that she wanted her season to be a time when people who left Poland to study somewhere else, people to if they wanted to come back, they can. So because coming back from abroad to Poland is like if you were debuting. So she wanted to invite people from abroad who are Poles to like share their ideas and make them comfortable in this space. So yeah.
And recently they organized, for example, special presentation of drama by Sasha Denisova, Ukrainian immigrants in Poland, very good playwriters. Sorry, I will not translate into English. Maybe my colleagues help me. 6 żeber gniewu. I don't know how to say 6 part of body. I remember them, but doesn't matter.
Okay.
It's about refugees in Poland. It's verbatim technique which they used. It means interviews with Ukrainian immigrants living in Poland. Very interesting drama, very good, very interesting. So they presented, they invited a lot of different people, artists, immigrants now. It's interesting place. Thank you.
Maybe it's worth to say that it's not only a discussion that brings people together and discussing ideas, but also like creating art together, singing together. And so it's like really powerful and important to relate this need of feeling being part of the community. So this could be powerful in changing the reality and the perspective, I think.
And if I may, I think that relates creating a community, the first presentation of Giulia Allegrini, who outlined the importance of creating community through theater, and how sometimes the artistic production may be something like an unexpected outcome of the community creation process, if we may. So that is important. And one quick question for you. You mentioned experiences coming from the Ukraine and from Belarus, dating back to the early 2010s, so 2020, 2012. So my question is, we have some refugees problem from Ukraine far before the Ukrainian crisis in 2014. This is something that we keep forgetting about that. And I think that this is something that you mentioned that deserves some piece of explanation, if you may.
So government, our Polish government, when like when this war has started, like started a lot of like actions. You know, it was some kind of an image for folk, like creating an image that we here Polish people, we are so open and we can help you. You can find your place here, like your safe place. And it was some kind of a publicity, like creating a good publicity. No, what?
Good PR?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course. It's the question is why they wanted to create a good PR, and that's why what I'm wondering right now, because like we want to present ourselves as a people who have a big hearts and could help, but usually it's like difficult and uncomfortable, you know. So it's like maybe it's nice to host a family for 2 or 3 days, but if they stay for a month, it becomes more and more problematic. So that's the idea, how to
I think that's very interesting, and it's also true of the UK as well, that you and we in the UK were happy to have Ukrainian refugees, or like refugees that look specific way or are exactly like us, but Syrian refugees, refugees from Pakistan, from so many other countries of the war torn, there was no conversation about that. And when the war started in Poland, we had journalists saying on the news, these are people just like us. Like other people are not like us. So I think that's an interesting conversation of who is welcome and who is not, and who would give them platform to and who we want. And I think that's interesting also for your work. Like, I don't know, do you think that the political situation in Italy at the moment is affecting the work that's being platformed from Italian institutes abroad?
No, is it working? Yes. Well, it's been such a long, dark night that I don't know anymore, but I don't think so. I think it's always been like this. As Federica was saying, we're always referring back to another area where we were, you know, the top of the culture, but yeah, it won't.
I'm Greek. That rings familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Just a word about the topic that Julia and Agatha. There is a broader field that is the artist as immigrant, the artist as refugee. And this theme, the artist as refugee, also in the politics, in the cultural politics, is important because there have been in the past many action of activism. For example, I know something by the French part because the Théâtre du Soleil, Ariane Mnouchkine Théâtre du Soleil, was and has been always very active through a network, an international network, I don't know how much connected with cultural diplomacy in the 70s and 80s to support the theater artists refugees. And also now Théâtre du Soleil made a lot about this the group of theater refugees from Afghanistan, including them in their troupe. So the frame for your paper, I think it's interesting to connect to a broader a broader theme about the artist as a refugee.
If I may add quickly something on that about the program. Tomorrow we have a panel specifically discussing this, and with Silvia Garzarella discussing Nureyev's situation and Piotr Orbatowski discussing the theater in as migrant bodies as masters, migrating masters in the recent. So we can conclude today. We will have more time to discuss this topic on ongoing situation, because we have one panelist missing today, which is a fortune in a way, because we can have more time to debate this and to get back on this topic if you like to. The last colleague, Kasia, this one. Tomorrow is Katarzyna Wozniak. She won't be here. She's not able to. She won't make it here, so we will have to change a little bit of the panels. But disregards tomorrow. No, she won't be online because she's sick.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for today. I believe that's us for the morning.
Yes.
Yes, it is. So there is.
Yes, I can do the announcement
Yes,
if you like to.
yeah.
So thank you, Sofia. So we can stop the recording. Fermiamo. We can stop broadcasting right now because here are some technical